Okay, the recording is started. Okay, yes. Yeah. Thanks, KV, and welcome everyone to this second lecture in this series of uh, analytic algorithms of problems in invariant theory. So last time we saw the problem of matrix scaling and its connection to invariant theory. So the matrix scaling problem arose as a very arose from a very simple torus action, as we saw last time. So in this talk, we will look at computational problems arising from torus actions in general. Okay. So just to recall, the torus is this group of diagonal invertible matrices will always work over the complex field. So it's just diagonal of T1 to Tn, where all the Ti's are non-zero complex numbers, right? And yeah, so any group action, or to be precise, any rational group action of Tn can be described as follows. So it can be described using a set of weights these weights will, the weight set will just be a subset of z to the n. And let's say the size of this weight set is m. So any rational group action of Tn can be described using a set of weights, and the action is as follows. So there are various ways to describe this action. The one I like the most is of the following form. So here the vector space is the vector space of polynomials with exponents from this weight set omega. Yeah, so it's z to the n. So we also allow a negative exponent. So yeah, technically these kind of polynomials are called Lorentz polynomials. Okay. So, but yeah, these are just polynomials where you allow negative exponents. So this is the collection of polynomials of the following form: sum over omega in omega, p omega, product I going from 1 to n, xi to the omega I, and the p omega complex numbers. Okay. Yeah, so the vector space is just the vector space of polynomials with exponents from omega. Okay. And yeah, so note that the dimension of this space V is m. So now the action, how Tn acts on this vector space. So Tn acts on this vector space by scaling the variable. Okay. So what I mean, so the group element T1 to Tn dot T, this is equal to T of T1 x1 and so on Tn xn. So the ith variable you scale by Ti. Okay, so that's the group action on this vector space of polynomials. So to describe it more explicitly, this becomes sum over omega, p omega, product I going from 1 to n, ti omega I, product I going from 1 to n, xi omega I. Okay. So If you want to look at in terms of coefficient, the coefficient p omega is sent to a new coefficient, which is p omega times product I going from 1 to n, pi omega I. So that is the group action. If you look at it in terms of the coefficient. Yeah. So any questions about the definition of the group action? So we won't prove it, but all the algebraic or rational group actions of Tn can be described using this way. Okay. So yeah. So now the question, the first algorithmic question we want to study is, the first question we want to study is what is the null cone for this group action? And yeah, so we'll prove a very elementary theorem about this. Yeah, so the P is in the null cone for the above action if and only if there exists some vector A in Zn such that the inner product between A and omega is less than 0. Okay, let me figure it. Is greater than 0 for all omega in the support of P. So here the support of P is just the set of omegas where there's a non-zero coefficient of P. Okay. Yeah, so P is in the null cone. If no if there exists a vector A whose inner product with all the omegas in the support is greater than 0. Okay. So yeah, I mean, if you're aware of this term, this is also this is basically just the Hilbert-Mumford criterion for torus action. So yeah, I mean, if you're not aware of this term, it's fine. You need not worry about it. Okay. So yeah, so let's prove this theorem. It's quite simple. Yeah, so let's first prove 2 implies 1. Or okay, so identify 2. So let's say yeah. So first, suppose there exists a vector A such that A omega is 0 for all omega in the support of P. So recall that null cone is the set of all elements which you can drive to 0 using the action of the group elements. So now we'll explicitly construct a set of group elements. So consider the group element T to the A1, T to the AI, T to the AN. Okay, so the yeah, so it's a diagonal matrix whose ith entry is T to the AI. t is some parameter which will drive to 0. So now let's consider the action of this on t. So this will be equal to t omega product over I t to the ai omega I and product over I xi to the omega I. This is what it will become. So this is equal to 1 over omega p omega t power a in a product omega times the monomial. So now since a omega in a product is greater than 0 for all omega in the support of p, hence limit t tending to 0, the action of this group element or this sequence of group elements acting on p will be 0, right? So as you drive t to 0, all the exponents are positive, so the whole thing will be driven to 0. So that's the first direction. Any questions? Okay. So yeah, the second direction too. Yeah. So suppose p. Yeah. So suppose p is in the null cone. So in this case, we want to prove that yeah, that you cannot have such a vector A. So you want to prove sorry.
Not
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So P is in the null cone. So you want to show that there exists a vector A. So I want to show. Okay. Yeah. So since P is in the null cone, there exists a sequence of group elements P1, Tk, such that limit k tending to infinity, Tk acting on P is driven to 0. So here Tk I'm using it as a shorthand for Tk1, Tkn. Yeah. So since this the whole polynomial is driven to 0, we'll look at a particular norm. So we can just define the norm of a polynomial as the sum of the absolute value squares of the coefficients. So then this norm will also be driven to 0. So let's look at what the norm of Tk dot P is. This will be just equal to sum over omega P omega square. If you look at the group action, this will be product over I Ti k absolute value square omega I. Okay. So let me just define xi to be log of absolute value of Ti k square. Okay. So then this term is equal to sum over omega P omega square. Yeah, so xi is a log, so it's the exponent. And okay, so let me get the product over I e to the xi omega I, which is the same as e to the x omega. Oh, yeah. Actually, technically, I should have defined it xk. Okay. Yeah. So limit k tending to infinity, this norm is also 0. Okay. So now, yeah, so let alpha denote the minimum value of this absolute value square of p omega in the support of p. Okay. And choose a k such that sum over omega p omega square e to the x k omega is less than this alpha. So this we can do because this thing is being driven to 0 as k tends to infinity. So for such a k, such a xk, right? This implies that each of these exponentials has to be less than 1, right? Because the sum is smaller than the minimum of this p omega squares. So since this is true, hence the inner product when okay, so sorry, this statement is true for all omega in the support, right? This is true for all omega in the support of p. So hence the inner product between xk and omega is less than 0 for all omega in the support. Yeah, so yeah, we can just define b to be minus xk, and that will have inner product positive with all the omegas. Okay. So that almost finishes the proof. There's only a slight technicality. So this b is a real vector, right? But I promised you an integer vector. So yeah, this is a very easy exercise, like some normal stuff. So I'll leave this the next slide. If there exists a real vector such that b omega is greater than 0 for all omega, then there also exists an integer vector such that the inner product is positive. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you can approximate the real vector by rationals and then clear out the denominators. Okay, so yeah, this finishes the proof of this characterization that P is in the null cone if and only if such a statement is true. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so now, so now the next question is, what is the computational complexity of this problem? So can we computationally decide if P is in the null cone? Right?
So the input is then just the coefficients.
Yeah, so I'll just describe the input in a second. So can we computationally decide if P is in the null cone? Yes. So yeah, what is the input description? So the input description consists of both the weights. So you can describe the weights omega omegas in capital omega in binary representation. So these are integer vectors, so you can describe them in binary representation. Okay, and in addition, you would also need yeah. So suppose each entry takes b bits. And we can also describe the support of P. So note that we only need the description of support of P, right? The null cone only depends on that. So you can describe the support of B explicitly. Or otherwise, if you're given the coefficients of P, we can just compute the support trivially. So then so the theorem is that there exists a poly NMB time algorithm to test if P is in the null cone. Okay, and so this algorithm is just linear programming, right? Because the description, the equivalence we proved, it just reduced this question to a linear program.
So Ankit, can you also assume that, if I give you, that you will give me a separator if the W I select is not the W. So you're looking for a B. So can one do some ellipsoid kind of thing also, where you talk to an oracle and get hold of the if say W for some support W dot B is negative.
Right. So are you asking, so if P is in the null cone, the algorithm will also output this vector A? Is that what you are asking?
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah. So the program will actually find that A. Yeah.
No, so I'm asking, do you need to know a full description of the omega, or can I?
Oh, I see. It can be even more efficient. Yeah. So omega could be exponentially sized.
Exactly.
But you only need a separating hyperplane. Yeah. So so what that means is that so if some current A is not the solution, then you just need to find some little omega where it is violated. And if you have that oracle, that is called the separation oracle. If you have that oracle, you can still solve this in polynomial time. Okay. So presenting this algorithm is not in the scope for this lecture. We'll just see some very simple algorithm for this, which doesn't solve this problem, but so the open question here is that is this true for actions of GLN? That is there a polynomial time algorithm to decide membership in the null cone for actions of GLN? So this we do not know. We know polynomial time algorithms for very, very simple group actions. This we don't know for general group actions of GLN. So this is open. So there's also a very exciting development recently regarding torus actions. We mentioned that
Ankit, how do you describe the GLN action?
Yeah, the GLN action again you describe using the weights for each irreducible representation in binary, and yeah, to describe the vector space and the vector, yeah, so you need to get into some technicalities. I think using some highest weight vectors and so on.
Yeah, so I think Luke's talk will actually start talking about this. Luke coding. So somewhere I think those talks are end of October, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I think Cole also might describe this. Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe.
okay.
Okay. So yeah, recent work of Professor Dogan, Malcolm, Walter, and Wigderson. So this work extended the above algorithms to all the other, like all the questions you can ask for torus actions, right? To orbit equality, orbit closure intersection, and then orbit closure containment. For torus action. Okay. So for torus action, there are polynomial time algorithms for all of these problems. Okay. Yeah, so orbit equality is if you want to test if the orbits of two vectors are equal or not. Orbit closure intersection is if you want to decide if the orbit closures intersect. And orbit closure containment is if asking if one vector lies in the orbit closure or another. Okay. For all of these problems, they're polynomial time algorithms. And yeah, so this paper uses again uses linear programming as a black box. Okay. Yeah, so linear programming is definitely needed if you want to decide things for torus actions. Okay. Okay. So yeah, let me now move on to describing what this problem we call the general scaling problem is. Yeah, so first we ask the question if P is in the null cone or not. So if P is not in the null cone, right, then we can ask the following question. If P is not in the null cone, can we compute an approximation of the minimum norm element in the orbit closure? Yeah, so if P is in the null cone, then we can drive the vector to 0. But if it's not in the null cone, then what is the minimum norm element, right? What is the closest you can get to 0? Okay? So that's the question. And it's just an optimization problem. So the optimization problem is the following. Infimum over T1 to Tn. Ti is a non-zero complex numbers. Sum over omega. E omega square. Product. Yeah, so I'm just explicitly computing the norm of the group action. Pi square. So this is the norm value, apply the group action on this P. So again, we'll substitute xi is log of pi square. So then this becomes infimum over x in Rn, sum over omega p omega square e to the x omega. Okay. Yeah, so now this is convex optimization. Yeah, I mean exponential is convex, then you have a linear function, the exponent, and then summing non-negative sums of these exponential. Okay. This is convex optimization. Okay. So yeah, so to define this general scaling problem, let's call this function fpx. Yeah, so yeah, actually it turns out that what is nicer is to define this function after taking a log. Okay. Okay.
So here are we assuming that P is given in some implicit representation? What kind of representation?
Yeah, so yeah, let's assume that M is polynomially small. So P is given explicitly as list of coefficients. Yeah.
The coefficients are given as a rational approximation.
Yeah. So yeah, the P omegas are given as rational numbers. Yes. Okay. Yeah, so it turns out it's nicer if you take a log for reasons we'll come to later. Yeah, I mean, somehow it smoothens the function out and it still retains the convexity. Even this function is convex. So it's not clear a priori, but even this is convex. Yeah, so let's calculate the gradient to find this problem. The gradient is just, I'll just write the formula out, but it's not too hard to compute. Omega divided by yeah, so the denominator is just a normalization due to the log. Okay? So you get 1 over that thing and then differentiate inside. Yeah, so this is the gradient. So note that omega is a vector, so that's why this gradient is a vector. The gradient, so as a side remark, the gradient at 0 is just sum over omega p omega square omega. So this is the gradient is 0, and yeah, I don't know if you might have seen this quantity in previous lectures. So this is also called the moment map. Just as an aside. The moment map is just gradient at 0 of this function fp. Okay, just to connect to previous talk. Okay, so now the general scaling problem is the following. Yeah, so given a p, explicitly as a list of coefficients and an error parameter epsilon, you want to find some x such that the norm L2 norm of this gradient at x is small. Okay. Is at L2 norm square of the gradient is at most epsilon. Okay. So that's the general scaling problem. And the reason to call this a scaling problem is that if you do this for matrix scaling, then we'll get exactly the scaling problem that we saw last. Okay? So if you do this for matrix scaling, then you'll get exactly the row and the column double stochastic scaling. Okay? So I'm debating whether to do that. Yeah, so okay, let me not, okay, let me just leave that next slide. Exercise. Yeah. So if you look at the action of STN cross STN on n by n matrices, where A comma B acts on M by pre and post multiplication, then the above framework leads to the problem of matrix scaling. Yeah. So you have to be a little bit careful while applying the above framework, because the actions are now of the special torus. So you have to define the gradient carefully. Okay? But yeah, it's quite elementary and can be done. Yeah, so that's the reason to call this a general scaling problem. And yeah, there are various special cases of this problem that arise. For example, there's a problem called matrix balancing, which is just the torus action by conjugation. Then there's tensor scaling, which is again a special case where you act by STN plus STN plus STN on tensors and so on. Okay, so for various torus actions, you get all kinds of scaling problems which have been well studied in the literature. Okay, so now next we'll move on to algorithms. But yeah, please feel free to ask if there are questions. Okay, so yeah, so as I said, this is just convex optimization, right? So you can, yeah, I mean, you can use the ellipsoid algorithm or interior point methods to solve this problem. So yeah, I mean, yeah, so that is out of the scope of this lecture. What we'll see is just a simple algorithm for this problem and its analysis. Okay? And the motivation to study this simple algorithm is also that some of these algorithms extend to the non-commutative setting, for example, actions of GLN, while some we do not know how to extend yet. For example, the ellipsoid algorithm or the interior point method, we do not have any n-logs for non-commutative group actions like GLN actions. Okay? So that is an open question. But this kind of algorithms that I'm going to show you, these can be extended easily to a GLN action. Okay, so yeah, so basically we'll see the simplest algorithm for this problem, okay, gradient descent. For the general scaling problem. Okay, so recall that we had this function fp of x, which was log of sum over omega p omega square t to the x inner product omega. Okay, so let me call alpha omega to be this p omega square, just to simplify things. Yeah, so this is just ln of sum over omega alpha omega e to the x. Yeah, so the gradient descent is pretty simple. I'm sure all of you have seen this. So you start with, yeah, so this is the grade. So you start with just the zero vector, and the next iterate xt plus 1 is just you move from the previous point slightly in the direction of the gradient. Yeah, so that's the whole algorithm. And yeah, so we'll analyze this algorithm now. Selective lemma. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so the theorem will prove following. Yeah, so suppose P is not in the null cone. Yeah, so if P is in the null cone, then this optimization problem is just going to zero, right? So not much to solve there. So we'll assume P is not in the null cone. So let me define a couple of quantities which govern the number of iterations the gradient descent takes. So one is just the log of the ratio of the sum of the alpha omegas, sum of the coefficients, and divided by the minimum of the coefficients. So of course, some of them can be zero. We only take the minimum or the non-zero. Okay. That is capital M. And then there's this norm of the weight vectors, which is just the max over omegas of the L2 norm square of the weights. Okay. So the maximum L2 norm square of the weights. So then in M n omega over epsilon iterations, gradient descent will output an x such that the norm of the gradient square is at most epsilon. Yeah, so that's theorem statement. So yeah, I mean, all of these quantities are pretty reasonable, right? Capital M is like, there's a log there, we're taking ratios of this coefficients, so that's quite reasonable. And then there's the maximum of the L2 norm squares of the weights. I mean, yeah, this can be large in the worst case if you describe weights using the binary representation. But most of the cases, these weights are pretty simple. Like for matrix scaling, these weights will be 0, 1 valued and so on. So this, in many cases, this n omega is actually a constant. It's not too large. So yeah, so all of these are pretty reasonable. The only drawback of this thing is that there's a 1 over epsilon dependence on the error parameter. Okay, that's the drawback.
So, and what do you start with? Which is your starting point in this, Anil? Okay.
Yeah, so the
It
starting
doesn't
point
matter.
is just
Oh,
the zero vector.
Okay.
Yeah, so you just start at 0.
And the distance to, I'm a bit confused. Because usually sometimes even the distance matters, no? I mean, in the usual gradient descent algorithms, you also.
So yeah, there's this parameter eta, which I haven't told you about, like what we'll set it to. We'll set it appropriately. Is that what you mean?
So there, so you will use the distance to the optimal there. No, sorry.
Yeah, so the thing is, we are only giving a guarantee on the norm of the gradient being small.
Mhm.
So that's why the distance to the optimal solution may not come in. If you're
Acha.
trying to give a guarantee that the function value itself will be close to the optimal,
Ah,
in that analysis,
okay.
the distance to the optimal matters. So yeah, so there are various versions of gradient descent. This is just one version, but this is the version that is relevant for us because the general scaling problem that we defined is in terms of the gradient.
Okay. Okay.
And yeah, the reason for this is that if you look at matrix scaling, this is the version that you get. Okay, you don't care about the function value actually getting small. You only care about the norm of the gradient getting small.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this will also imply that the function value is getting small, but there's some loss there, which yeah, is important. Okay. So yeah, so the drawback is that there's a 1 over epsilon depends on the error parameter epsilon. And yeah, so this there is no easy fix to this. If you want polylogarithmic dependence on epsilon, you need to move on to this more sophisticated algorithms like ellipsoid or interior bound methods. Yeah. Okay, so let's prove this theorem. So yeah. So we'll need some properties of this function fp, which I'll list now. Yeah, so the Hessian of this function fp is always positive semi-definite, and it's upper bounded in this PST order by 2 max by 2 times this norm, max norm. Times the identity matrix. Yeah, so the fact that this is PST, this Hessian is PST, this is just convexity. And this fact that the Hessian is upper bounded by some number, this is usually called smoothness. Okay, so in the optimization literature, this is called smoothness. That the function is sort of absolutely bounded by a quadratic function. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, something like let me stop sharing and refresh.
There's some. You're still co-host, so you should be able to share.
Okay, yeah. It works now. Share the screen. Okay. Yeah. So sorry about that. So yeah. So convexity and smoothness. Let's prove this. So yeah. So it suffices to prove that for all unit vectors u in Rn, the inner product between u, basically the quadratic form of the Hessian, which is the this is at least 0 and at most 2 and omega. Yeah, so now this quadratic form is basically just the second derivative in the direction u. This would be equal to d square by dt square of ft x plus tu. So it take a step in the u direction and then take a second derivative with respect to that step size. Okay, so that's just yeah, you can verify this. And yeah, so let's calculate what is this fp of x plus tu. This is equal to log of sum over omega alpha omega e to the x plus tu inner product omega. So this is just ln of sum over omega beta omega e to the t u inner product omega, where we'll define beta omega to be just this residual coefficient, so alpha omega times e to the x omega. Yeah. So now let me call this thing as g of t. We only care about the parameter t, little t. Yeah. So let's calculate the first derivative. G prime of t is sum over omega beta omega e to the t u omega u in a product omega. So yeah, u in a product omega will come down, and then you'll also have to divide by the whole sum because it's a log. Yeah, so that's the first derivative. And then the second derivative. So let's first differentiate the numerator. So there we'll get sum over omega beta omega u omega square divided by sum over omega prime. The denominator will remain the same. And then the second term will get the numerator remains the same. And then the denominator becomes square. And then we'll differentiate the denominator in the numerator, and we'll get yeah, sorry, it's getting a bit messy. So yeah, let me just simplify this expression a bit. So we only care about the derivative 0, right? So let me simplify. So g prime, g double prime 0 is equal to sum over omega, beta omega, u in a part omega square divided by this minus sum over omega divided by sum over omega prime beta omega prime square. Okay. So now we can introduce another variable gamma omega, which is just this beta omega is normalized. Just beta omega divided by sum of all the beta omega primes. Okay. So then this simplifies even further. This is just sum over omega gamma omega u in a product omega square minus sum over omega gamma omega u in a product omega whole square. So yeah, I mean, this is starting to look like expectation of x square minus expectation of x whole square. So this is exactly that. So note that sum of these gamma omegas is 1. So then you can use Jensen's inequality, and the convexity of the square implies that g double prime 0 is at least 0. So that proves the convexity. And then for the other direction also, it's easy. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to upper bound this by twice the max norm of the omega. Right, because yeah, u is a unit vector. You can just use Cauchy-Schwarz or something. And some of the gamma omegas is fine. Okay, yeah. So just a quick calculation to show that this function is convex as well as smooth. So actually, our convexity won't need. We only need smoothness to verify convexity as well. Okay, so let me now.
So even for conversions, you don't require it. Convexity.
Yeah,
because
so
you're doing
basically we only guaranteeing that the norm of the gradient is small. So for that you don't need convexity. So even for non-convex functions, right? If you run gradient descent,
yeah,
it'll give you a point which is a like a saddle point at least.
point. And here, because it is convex, you can assume that okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the fact that since the function is convex, this this point will be unique.
Correct.
Where the norm of the gradient is small. But just to guarantee that we won't need convexity in the algorithm.
Okay.
Okay, so to finish the proof, we'll just use a very general lemma, which will also prove. Oh yeah, so actually, let me say that. So yeah, remember we had this function. Yeah, so we had this function here, sum of exponentials, and we took a log. And the reason to take a log is that after taking the log, the function is smooth. Yeah, without taking a log, the function wouldn't be smooth. Like the exponential will just blow up. So after taking the log, it's sort of controlled, and then you can apply gradient descent. Okay. Yeah, so the general lemma is as follows. Suppose the function f is beta smooth that is Hessian is upper bounded by beta times identity, okay, or the max eigenvalue of the Hessian is at most beta. So then gradient descent with step size eta will be inverse of beta.
Mhm.
It returns an x such that norm gradient, the norm square of the gradient is at most epsilon. In number of iterations, which is beta f of x0 minus f of star over epsilon iteration. Yeah, so basically in 1 over epsilon, O of 1 over epsilon iteration, you'll find this point where the norm square of the gradient is at most epsilon. Okay? And then there's some other parameters that appear. One is the smoothness parameter, which we already bounded for our function. And the second is the difference between the initial function value and the optimal function value, which, yeah, again, it's not too hard to bound for our function. I mean, our function has a log in the front, so this thing will be quite small. Yeah, so that's the general lemma. And let me give you a quick proof of this. Yeah, I mean, so these are all classical things, right? We can easily find in optimization books. But yeah, the point is that these kind of statements actually we can extend to non-commutative settings as well, which you will see in later talks. Okay, so yeah, so note that the gradient descent step update is xt plus 1 is xt minus 1 over beta gradient of x at xt. So then, yeah, so as an aside, if f is beta smooth, then you can upper bound f universally by a quadratic function. Okay? So then f of y is at most f of x plus the linear part, which is grad of x, y minus x, plus some quadratic term, which is will be beta over 2 y minus x norm square. Okay? So let me leave this an exercise. Basically, you can prove this using the whatever it's called, the mean value theorem or something, right? All right. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so this is elementary calculus. So since the Hessian is always upper bounded by beta, you can upper bound this function by a quadratic approximation. So this is the above will be quite useful. So we'll apply the above with y equals xt plus 1 and x equals xt. So f of xt plus 1 is at most f of xt plus grad of xt, xt plus 1 minus xt plus beta over 2 xt plus 1 minus xt L2 norm square. So now we'll plug in the value of xt plus 1 minus xt. This will be f of xt. Yeah, so this value is minus 1 over beta gradient. So this will be minus 1 over beta norm of gradient square plus, yeah, so xt plus 1 minus xt is 1 over beta square norm of gradient square. So this will become 1 over 2 beta gradient xt square. Okay. So this is equal to f of xt minus 1 over 2 beta grad ft xt square ft. Yeah, so we've proven that at each step the function value will decrease by some amount. Okay. So if grad f xt norm square, if at this current point the norm of this gradient is at least epsilon, norm square is at least epsilon, then f of xt plus 1 minus f of xt, the function value drop is at most minus epsilon over 2 beta. So it'll drop by at least epsilon over 2 beta. So now this cannot go on for too long, right? That's the idea. So if this norm of the gradient square is at least epsilon for all little t in 0 up to capital T minus 1, then we'll get that f of x capital T minus f of x 0. This is at most minus epsilon t capital T over 2 beta. Hence, t is at most 2 beta f of xt, sorry, f of x0 minus f of xt over epsilon. And f of xt is at least f star, so we can just upper bound this by 2 beta f of x0 minus f star over epsilon. So yeah, if all of these norms were large, norm of the gradients were large, then capital T cannot go on for too long. So yeah, so in these many iterations, you must, one of these points, x0 to xt, must have the norm of the gradient square being small. Okay, that's the proof.
So, and your statement that only beta smoothness is used because you can say f of y is bigger than or equal to, is upper bounded by that, independent of whether f is convex.
Yes, yes, yeah. So f can be upper bounded by a quadratic function. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So the smooth the function is, the bigger step size you can take.
So if,
Yeah.
of course, the way you have formulated it, it is not strongly convex. It is only smooth.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Yeah, but if there was a different formulation, then you would even get a log of 1 by epsilon, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So strongly convex means that the action is actually lower bounded by some, the minimum eigenvalue of the action is also lower bounded. And in that case, yeah, actually you get a log 1 over epsilon kind of convergence. But yeah, it turns out that for our function, they're not strongly convex. So you don't get log 1 over epsilon convergence when you apply gradient descent. Yeah. Yeah.
So there is no trick like you use this trick of using log to get beta smoothness.
Sorry, are you asking, is there some trick to get strong convexity?
Yeah. Or you know that it is not strongly convex, is it?
Yeah. These functions are not strongly convex.
Okay.
Yeah. Even the matrix scaling function is not strongly convex. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, these are called first order algorithms, and these first order algorithms can only give you 1 over epsilon kind of convergence. Yeah. Yeah. So to get log 1 over epsilon, you'll have to apply ellipsoid or NT-upon methods. Okay.
And sorry, can you make the statement? So you said these same ideas now will go for non-commutative also. But of course, the analysis is far more complicated.
It's not really more complicated. It's the same analysis. Yeah, you just have to frame it in the correct way. But yeah, it's essentially the same analysis.
Okay.
The statement will also be similar. like there also you'll define the norm of the representation and so on. But yeah, I guess maybe Cole will cover that in his lectures.
Okay.
I think.
Nice.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So yeah, so let me tell you why sort of this 1 over epsilon kind of dependence is not desirable. Yeah, so just give you some motivation for polylog 1 over epsilon kind of algorithms. Yeah, so suppose we want to test algorithmically if P is in the null cone or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I already told you that linear programming can do this, but yeah, that's a complicated algorithm. Like, is there any hope of doing it with simple algorithms like this? And yeah, it seems like not. Let me tell you why. So yeah, we saw this equivalence. So yeah, recall P is not in the null cone if and only if, yes, I'm writing the contrapositive for all vectors x in Rn, there exists some omega in the support of P such that the inner product between x and omega is greater than equal to 0. That's kind of the contrapositive. Yeah, okay, I mean, maybe there's a sign, but yeah, this is correct. And yeah, there's another statement which I didn't tell you. So this is a if and only if there exists some vector alpha whose entries are non-negative and whose support is a subset of support of P, such that when you do the convex combination of the weights, the conical combination of weights of this alpha, that is 0. Okay. So yeah, I mean, this is something you can, so this is something that is also known as Farkash lemma or linear programming duality. Or you can also derive it using the Kempfness criteria. Okay. Yeah, so I didn't go into this, but yeah, this can be easily derived by using the convex optimization framework that I described. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so it's not in the null cone if and only if the 0 lies in the conical combination of these weights omega, okay, or in the convex combination. Same in this case. So so suppose now so suppose we have managed to solve our optimization problem. So suppose we find x such that the gradient of the function fp is small. Okay. Yeah. So suppose we have found this x So what does it mean for the null cone problem, right? That's what we want to discuss. So the gradient, if you recall, had the following thing. It was sum over omega, p omega square, ex omega omega divided by sum over omega. So it's exactly a convex combination of the weights. So let me define beta omega to be p omega square ex omega divided by the normalization. Right. So then the gradient is exactly the convex combination of the weights with respect to beta omega. Okay. Yeah. So now this is very interesting because if you actually found a point where the gradient was 0, then you can be sure that P is not in the null cone, right? That's this third point of this characterization. The 0 will lie in the convex combination of weights. But we only managed to find a point where the gradient is actually small. Okay? So how small do we need to make it so that we can be sure that P is not in the null cone? Okay? Yeah, so if the norm of this convex combination is at most epsilon, how small should epsilon be to make sure that P is not in the null cone? Okay. Yeah, so this epsilon is basically what is dictated by this quantity we call weight margin. It is, yeah, basically just, yeah, let me define this definition. But yeah, the punchline is that this epsilon is exponentially small in the dimension for most group actions. Okay? So for most group actions, you need to ensure that the norm of the gradient is exponentially small before you can be sure that you have solved the null cone problem. And that is why it is desirable to have poly log 1 or epsilon kind of running time for this optimization problem. I mean, of course, it's important for other reasons also, but we're talking about invariant theory. For invariant theory, it's important because this epsilon can be exponentially small. Okay. Yeah, so this definition. Yeah, so sorry, I'm already on time. Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so let omega be a set of weights. Then we'll define this weight margin to be the minimum over all subsets of the weights such that 0 is not in the convex hull of the minimum L2 norm of a vector in the convex hull. So it's a bit mouthful. Yeah, so the definition is, so take these weights and take any subset such that 0 does not lie in that convex hull. And then what is the minimum norm of a vector in the convex hull? Okay? How close to 0 it gets. Okay? That's kind of the margin. So yeah, so in this set of weights, either 0 will lie in the convex hull or any vector will be far away from 0. So that's the margin you have. That's the weight margin. And yeah, this is the weight margin that will dictate how small epsilon needs to be.
Hmm.
Okay. And yeah, for most group actions, this is exponentially small. Yeah, but it's only polynomially small for matrix scaling and some other special group actions. Okay. So there are very few special problems. For this, actually, this weight margin is polynomially small, in which case you can still run this first order methods to decide the null cone problem. But for most other group actions, it's exponentially small, in which case you would need poly log 1 or epsilon kind of running time. Yes. Yeah, so that's the motivation for to have this poly log 1 or epsilon kind of running time. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's all I have. I'll stop here.
Very nice.
See my, sorry, I'll just be back to my bed.